Welcome to Lecture 3 of our unit on the Renaissance. Today we will be discussing on looking at the Renaissance writers, those who spread their thoughts and ideas and opinions in the written form. This lesson will be looking at the writers Dante, Patriarch, Boccaccio, Machiavelli, Shakespeare, and Thomas More. As always, we'll please have your Lecture 3 and worksheet out as we are filling and going forward. And let us get started. First, let me ask you a few questions. What qualities do people look for in a leader? Think about that for a minute and then hit continue when you're ready. Do you look for a good speaker? Someone who shares the same values as you? Perhaps a person that is rich and successful? Think about it. And other things that we see, these other questions we'll be seeing coming up, and consider those as we have our discussion today. Another question. What leadership qualities are good for a country? Now we are needing to think about the bigger picture. Not just about what people think of for following how you would follow someone yourself, but someone the people as a whole can follow and get behind. What do you think? In terms of running a country, can the ends justify the means? In lay terms, if the end result is good, does it matter how a leader got us there? It's a pretty deep question when considering an issue that affects not a few people, but the people of a whole within a country, especially if those means are questionable. There are many writers that were well regarded throughout the Renaissance. Some were poets, some were dramatic, some were about dreary. Let's take a look at a few that shaped the Renaissance in a literary way. Starting with Dante, many writers began to write in the vernacular. That is to say, writers wrote in their native language, then in Greek or Latin. It could also be written in Italian, German, English, and French, but because it was written in the vernacular, the language of the reader, this made it easier for people to understand and grasp what the author was talking about. Renaissance writers wrote for self-expression or to portray the individuality of their subjects, and it started with those trends that many modern writers today still follow. Here we see a picture of Dante and a book of his cover, The Divine Comedy, which actually is an interesting title given the fact that the book talks about traveling through hell into purgatory on its way back out to paradise. For those of you that are interested in a modern day look at this, read the book Inferno by Dan Brown. Goes into a little bit more detail and adds some interesting mystery and suspense to this particular book. Speaking of Dante, let's get a better look at the guy. Born in Florence, Italy, he was referred to as the father. Let me go back. He was an Italian poet, writer, theorist, philosopher, and political thinker. He was born in Florence, Italy, and referred to as the father of the Italian language. As mentioned before, he wrote the book The Divine Comedy, which was an epic poem about his travels through hell, purgatory, and heaven. It was broken up into exactly those three parts. Those parts he called Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. As for you Xbox fans, they even made a video game about it. Next, let's take a look at Patriarch. Patriarch is sometimes called the father of humanism. He was a great poet who later wrote in both Italian and Latin. That's pretty impressive to be able to write both those languages. He wrote sonnets, some of which are basically 14-line poems about a mysterious woman named Laura. Little is known of Laura, other than she died from the plague in 1348. So let's listen to a sonnet about Laura. The eyes I spoke of once, in words that burn, the arms and hands and feet of a lovely face that took me myself from such a place of time and marked me out from other men. The wavering hair of unmixed gold that shone, the smile that flashed with angelic rays, that used to make this earth a paradise, are now all a little dust, all feeling gone. And yet I live, grief and disdain to me, left where the light I cherish never shows. In fragile bark on the temptress sea, here let my loving song come to a close. The veins of my accustomed art is dry, and this my lyre turned at last to tears. Dude must have loved her. So how does one get to become known as the father of humanism? Well, by putting classical philosophical ideas into a Christian framework. At least that's how Francesco Patriarch did. In the Roman Catholic Europe, many of these ideas of ancient Greece and Rome were not likely to be accepted unless they could be reconciled with the Christian faith, and Patriarch did so in his writings. His basic idea was that the study of mankind, as such, was a viable and important field for Christian people, thus as laying the groundwork for later Renaissance figures to read and popularize classical history, literature, and philosophy, with its man as the center of all things foundation point. Which is what humanism really was, looking at the person, the people, not just religion and a god. Our next author, Bach, can I pronounce this guy's name? Bach Horatio. He wrote the book Decameron. In it, he told in Italy during the Black Death. It was about 7 women and 3 men who hid in a villa for 2 weeks, telling different stories to each other every night. It's basically a series of realistic and sometimes off-colored stories. The Decameron presents both tragedy and comic views of life. And here we see the 7 women and the 3 guys portrayed. Don't they look sweet? From there, we have to start looking at Niccolo Machiavelli and his ideas of how to be a good leader, which are still topics for discussion today. Niccolo Machiavelli was an Italian historian, politician, diplomat, philosopher, humanist, and writer who lived in Florence during the time of the Renaissance. He wrote a book that was entitled The Prince. It explains how a ruler can gain power and keep it in spite of his enemies. Machiavelli, through his book, said that most people are selfish, fickle, and corrupt, and therefore a ruler should not be concerned with what is morally right, but what is politically effective. Sometimes this might involve misleading your people, whereby we have the question, do the ends justify the means? Or was the result, the ending result, worth the effort put into it to get us to the end? Was it worth it? And like all historical figures, as we've seen before, here we have Machiavelli, who's portrayed in the book, or in the game, Assassin's Creed. And now just a few brief thoughts about 2 other Renaissance writers from the North, in this case, England. William Shakespeare was and has become a very famous writer during the Elizabethan age. Born in 1564, he later found himself performing at a playhouse in London. He loved reading classical writings, which there were many, which were many times put into his stories. He was successful in portraying the people as imperfect beings, and because of that, people were the readers were able to understand many of his works. Even today, many of his works are required reading in high schools and colleges. Thomas More was an English lawyer, philosopher, author, statesman, and humanist. Born in 1478, he was born up into the Catholic faith. One of his writings included a piece called Utopia, which literally means not place. However, some have come to see it to actually mean the ideal place, as it was described in his book. The premise of the book is that if you can get rid of all the wants of a society, such as gold, silver, corruption, and other negative elements, you can have a peaceful society where everyone is out to help each other out, help everyone else out. So all religions are accepted, and the need for money is gone. His ideas, created back in the 1500s, lasted hundreds of years and were used to help write the U.S. Constitution. The part of the U.S. Constitution that talks about the freedom is the freedom of religion, which can be traced back to Thomas More's utopian ideas. As a result, Renaissance writers wrote in the vernacular and about people and life rather than about God, and set many trends that are still used today by modern writers. I hope everyone has learned a little bit more about some of the Renaissance writers in this lecture. If you have any questions, please let me know and we'll get them figured out for you right away. Keep up the good work and stay awesome.